Bill Holiday here. The podcast is called Beyond the Classroom, and the producer here for all of these is Reggie Martell. He's off to my right. And we've got Gary Shaw and Brian Edwards with us today. Gary is a time-honored researcher in the John F. Kennedy assassination case. He goes back decades, literally almost to the beginning. Gary, you are a legendary figure to the point where if your name is affiliated with something that comes up relative to research in the John F. Kennedy assassination case, it gets instant credibility because of you. So congratulations on that.
Thank you for that.
And Brian, probably you don't remember this or me, but we met approximately 25 years ago at JFK Lancer through Deborah Conway. And you have come up through the ranks, I would say. Compared to Gary, you're a newbie, although I'm going to give you in the vicinity, you can correct me if I'm wrong, of about 25 years or so of research in this case. And you, along with another of your cohorts, Casey Quinlan, produced a book, Behind the Fence Line, something to that extent. And that's with the Ed Hoffman case and Ed Hoffman's ability to have seen from the Stemmons Freeway what was going on in the parking lot atop the grassy knoll at the vortex of the picket fence on top of the grassy knoll. And
he did a great job with that.
I thought so too, yeah. And Gary, let's go over to you. You had an idea for a project here and you contacted Brian. Two things I'd like to get out of this. One is, what is it you were after? What were you trying to do? And the second thing, how do you go about this? Where do you start? Where do you do your research? Where do you find your resource material?
Well, with this particular book, Admitted Assassin, that Brian and I worked on, it came to me. I didn't go looking for this. We had opened a JFK Assassination Information Center in Dallas. This was around 1989 or so. And we got a little publicity. And about that time, Ricky White, whose father was a Dallas police officer in 1963, showed up at our doorstep with a story. And that's the story that I began to follow. It's a convoluted, long, drawn-out affair. And we pursued this for at least 2 years. And then I kind of put it back on the back burner. Didn't do anything. This was about like 1990, 91, 92, along in that time. And I kept researching it and finding out what I could about it. But the story is a fascinating one, a mysterious one, and that's what I began to work on. And myself and 4 other fellas all worked on it. Larry Harris, attorney Bud Fensterwald, and a investigator, PI out of Houston named Joe West. Those fellas, all 4 of them, died within 5 or 6 years of our starting in on this investigation. And so I put it aside for many years. And in fact, it wasn't until, 5, 6 years ago, wasn't it, Brian?
Yeah.
That you and I began to work together on it. And that's how it happened. It's a great story. And the boy that came to us told us absolute truth. And the artifacts that he brought forward were real, very real. And that's how this all began.
So what was the story that Ricky came to you with and got your attention?
Okay. He had rediscovered his father's military footlocker. Roscoe White, his father, was in the Marine Corps. He actually went across into the Far East on the same ship as Lee Harvey Oswald. And they were stationed for many days in the same location over in the Far East. in this footlocker of his daddy's was all types of material. And basically, the story is this: Roscoe White was in the Marine Corps and served for 4 years plus, and then came back in October of 1963. His daddy Roscoe went to work for the Dallas Police Department. That's the same month that Lee Harvey Oswald went to work at the Texas School Book Depository. That's the scenario that we were dealt when Ricky came to us the first time and told us the story. And basically, in that footlocker was a diary, a journal that his father had kept from the time he got out of high school, basically, maybe earlier. We don't know because the diary disappeared. All the way through until the time of his death. He died in a tragic, explosive accident in September of 1971. But this is what was in the footlocker. You can see in his work at the Dallas Police Department, he handled the photography portion of it. And there you can see a lot of the evidence photographs that the Dallas Police Department had. What's missing from there is a picture of the diary, because by the time we took this picture, the diary had been confiscated. I can't think of a better word, by the FBI. Stolen would be a better term, probably. But that's the contents of the footlocker, and the diary is what started Ricky on this quest to learn about his father. The diary, Ricky was not a reader, and it took him several years to get to a page and a half in that diary where his father describes what happened in Dealey Plaza, how he was behind the fence and he fired the fatal headshot that killed the president. That was among other things. Many things were in that diary. That's kind of what the diary looked like. It was one of these clasps, had a blocking clasp on it. But basically, I'm not going to read this, but you can show it up there. That he fired the shots, that there were two other men with him. His code name was Mandarin, and that appears in other places in the diary. Lebanon was on the 6th floor. That was a code name. And Saul was in the records building. Again, a code name, and we don't know who these individuals are. But he tells the story about it and how he later had to take out an officer at 10th and Patton there in Dallas, which was obviously J.D. Tippit. The reason for him taking him out, which means he killed him, is unknown exactly. My suspicion is that Tippit, who knew Roscoe and Jack Ruby, by the way, he thought something was amiss and Roscoe had to kill him. That's the story. But Ricky and Tricia, his wife, read that page and a half over and over, and it was melted into their mind, so to speak. And so they recreated this for us, and it's in the book that tells the story. So
I'm sure that our viewers or listeners understand this. Roscoe White, ex-Marine in Asia for a time, comes back, ultimately ends up on the Dallas Police Department force. And I think you're saying that he's admitting that he shot from the grassy knoll and then was able to get himself over to the corner of 10th and Patton Streets.
That's right.
Within approximately, I guess, 45 minutes or so. And also shot J.D. Tippit when Tippit pulled over to confront somebody who was walking on the street.
Well, that's a mystery also. We don't understand it, and nobody was there to understand exactly what happened. The identification of the killer. Some said there were two men there. There's witnesses. It says another police vehicle was in the area. It's the gun, cartridges, The bullets found in his body, in Tippett's body, and all that is so
Mishandled.
and
Convoluted, yeah.
good. Some of it had to have been manipulated and so forth. That's an unsolved murder, except here's a man who said he did it in his own handwriting.
In his diary, yeah.
Yeah.
Is this a good time to bring up other theories about who fired the fatal shot? We can go back to 1988, Nigel Turner's series, The Men Who Killed Kennedy, in which he identifies Corsican mobsters. I think he even names one, a fellow by the name of Lucien Sarti, as being among the shooters, and also Jim Files, the James Files story. How do those stories mesh with this one, if you will, Gary and Brian?
Well, I'm familiar with, intimately familiar with both of them. And Nigel Turner became a friend of mine. And that whole thing is based on the Sarti part, is based on a written description given by a man by the name of Christian David.
David, yeah.
So you can take the word of a criminal because I found him in jail over in Georgia. He was in jail in this country, and I told Steve Ravel, who really did the work for Nigel Turner, if you could get to him, he could tell you some things, because he was connected to some of the people in the assassination apparatus going on at that time. I don't believe either of those stories, Files or Christian David's story about Sarti. This makes more sense, and there's evidence that points to Roscoe White having done it, and we'll get into that in a minute. We could spend days on Sarti and Files.
When you mentioned James Files, I had a long conversation with a guy yesterday about James Files, and he's trying to convince me that the guy was telling the truth. I don't know. I've never met the man, but I can tell you I don't believe his story. Let's leave it at that. It's too wild of a stretch to go from being a gopher for a mobster to all of a sudden, hey, we got one guy short. Can you help us kill the president? Okay, sure. I don't buy that at all. So the guy's sat in prison for a long time. He probably had access to a lot of books, and he probably read up on them and learned as much as he could about it and integrated himself into the story. I simply don't believe his story, but I had to get the book just to say that I have read it, and I'll leave it at that.
All right, let's not speculate on that anymore, either, the David story or the James Files story. Let's get back to this story. Where should we pick up, Gary?
Well, as I said, Ricky, once he had found this diary and began to look into his dad's story and so forth, and the materials that he had found, one of the things in the diary was that, and Ricky actually remembered him burying something in a metal container. They had a cabin at Lake Whitney, which is probably 50 or probably 75 miles south and west of Dallas, big lake, and a nice cabin, and that his dad had buried something down there. He remembered that. And he also remembered, and let me throw this in right quick, on the day of the assassination, Ricky was 3 years old, basically, at the time of the assassination. And on Sunday morning, when Ruby killed Oswald, he was having a birthday party. And his dad came running in and said, "Y'all pack up. We're leaving here." And they disappeared for a few days. Anyway, that's kind of a side story. But Ricky came in. One of the things that he was interested in was this metal container. And I'm not going to go into great detail. The book does, about finding a metal canister that had things sealed away in it. It was a waterproof container, and he found it in the attic of his grandfather's house. And in that were materials that Ricky, just a good old country boy, been in business for himself for years and years and years, and has a great family, and just a guy that doesn't know how to lie. He never learned that.
Let me ask this again before you go on.
Go ahead.
Some people have been hesitant about coming forward for fear, literally, of their lives. Is he feeling threatened? Has he had?
Oh yeah, they were they were threatened. Right after we started the book, he had a phone call and said, "Don't you recall what we told you originally? That your children might be in danger and that sort of thing." And they were crying when they called me and told me this. So yes, there was some apprehension and fear in telling this story, but he wanted to get it out because he thought it was important to this nation to know what really happened, and this may be a key to it, may hold a key to it.
It's interesting that when I do presentations on the Kennedy assassination and tell people that even today, some people feel threatened about coming forward with their stories, which is part of the reason we don't know the whole story. They're incredulous. They can't believe that people today would be under a threat to come forward with the truth.
Well, it just shows you that we're hitting a nerve somewhere. We're making somebody uncomfortable, which is good, because the more exposure this story gets, the more exposed they become.
Gary, you used the pronoun they a number of times in your description. Does he know who called him? Do the phone records indicate where the phone call came from? Has he or you sought to find out?
No way we could find out.
It came up on his wife's phone, and it came up with the caller ID of a friend of theirs who they speak with almost every day. So that's why they readily answered the phone. And then this unknown male voice said, "You apparently didn't take our word that we can take your first child if we had to," and then hung up. So it came up as a phone number that they had known. Otherwise, I would have access. We would have been able to find out where that call came from. But that's how they hacked into that phone system.
Boy, that would be quite a cool, wouldn't it, to be able to find out who.
Okay, he'd also in the diary, Ricky learned about a safe deposit box his dad talked about, and he had left a bank bag and keys to a safe deposit box at this particular bank there in Oak Cliff portion of Dallas. And he was trying to locate that box and get into it. His father was dead. And so they did. They went down there and they had the key, so they were allowed to open the box. But the banker told her, we can't let you have the contents until you probate your father's will. So in that box were about, we've heard different amounts, but $250,000. And he had a receipt for that that's now disappeared. But anyway, they were bearer bonds of $200,000 to $250,000. So after that, Ricky went to the district attorney, assistant district attorney there in Midland where he lived. This is Al Shorey, and told him the story. And Mr. Shorey got nervous and called in the FBI. So before the FBI has ever even talked to Ricky White, they start surveilling him. And these are surveillance reports that I got from through Freedom of Information that tells every day that they watched he and his wife for several days before they finally approached him. And when they approached him had a babysitter there. They had Ricky and Tricia had two girls, and she had to call and say the FBI is here. They want you to come home right now. And so there in the front yard, they confronted Ricky and threatened him with, showed him a book, and had him read it out loud. That there'd be $200,000 fine and jail time for anyone who withheld evidence from the federal authorities. Scared that poor boy to death, of course, and they had him pack up all the contents, including the diary, in a box and take it to the federal building there in Midland, Texas, and where they interrogated him for several hours, browbeating. I mean, he came home beaten down, to say the least. Went in and he put the box on his pool table in the rec room and went and laid down on the bed and cried. Started crying. He was so upset. One of the FBI agents then shows up, knocks on the door, tells his wife that he evidently left his notebook, his notepad in Ricky's materials. And so she went to tell Ricky that. And when he came back, he was going out the door, said, found what I was looking for. And several days later, they noticed the diary was now missing, that they had actually they'd made some copies of it down at the FBI office and made impressions, wax impressions or clay impressions of the safe deposit key, and really beat the old boy down. So the diary disappeared. We've never seen it since. They denied that they filched it, but it's obvious to me. Anybody that'll destroy the evidence like they have in this case, including a handwritten note from Lee Harvey Oswald to the FBI.
That's a James Hosty note?
Yeah, and other things like that. The paper bag that allegedly the rifle was in, and it was destroyed during testing. How do you do these kind of things? Well, it's real easy if there's a problem to your evidence. So that's kind of the story, and gets us to the point that we and it's a long story. I'm not going to go into detail. Where he finds the canister finally. Put it briefly, he dug up the entire backyard, or I'm talking to me and the investigator, and dug up the entire backyard of the cabin, which they didn't own at that time. Roscoe had sold it prior to his death in 1971. So anyway, Ricky learned from his mother that it might be in his grandfather's. And so Ricky went from Lake Whitney to there and found this canister up in the back corner of an attic. He had to get a crowbar, and his wife really worked to get it open. But the contents of it were amazing. And one of the things that's in there is his dog tag, Roscoe's dog tag, Marine Corps. And then these two pictures, they're laminated in plastic. This identifies who the canister belonged to and what it's about. The picture of the Warren report being given to President
Johnson.
Yeah. And then a picture of Jack Ruby in handcuffs at the courthouse. So there's no doubt about the ownership of the canister. Therefore, what's in it is very, very telling and interesting, to say the least. It contained, if you got the three cables up there, they're about probably 5 inches, 4.5, 5 inches wide, and about 7 inches long. They were typed orders to Roscoe, and let me just read them to you. That'd probably be the simplest thing to do. You can see the first slide. You can see it's from Navy Intelligence, and has Roscoe White's military serial number on it and some other information. This, best we could tell, this was from February of 1963, and it was to Mandarin. And it says foreign affairs assignments have been canceled. The next assignment is to eliminate a national security threat to worldwide peace. Destination will be Houston, Austin, or Dallas. Contacts are being arranged now. Orders are subject to change at any time. Reply back if not understood. And it's signed off by C. Bowers. We don't know who that is. And OSHA is Office of Special Handling Affairs or something like that. Not the OSHA that we know about today.
It's an incredible document right there.
Yes, it is.
Incredible.
And you can tell very, very old and deteriorated. The plastic had turned yellow, which is the reason we couldn't get a real good copy of it, and streaked. In the bottom, it says RE rifle, code AAA, destroyed /own/. Now, at the time that this was had to have been buried by Roscoe or hidden by Roscoe before his death in 1971, nobody had ever heard of the ZR rifle program that the CIA had for what they called executive action, assassination. So what RE rifle is, we don't know. We're not going to find that, I guess, in CIA records, but obviously it had something to do with this whole thing.
Was Roscoe assassinated?
Yes, in my opinion, and in the opinion of Ricky and his pastor, who heard him say he knew who did it, and there was an explosion where he worked.
Right.
Very strange, and he was burned over 90% of his body, but he lived about 24 hours before he died. And his pastor, in there, he confessed to taking life on both foreign and domestic soil. And he said he saw who did it, but he forgave him, whatever that meant. The fact that he confessed to assassinations was important to the pastor. So yes, I don't think it was an accident.
No, Geneva has told Gary, and then she was subsequently interviewed on audio tape by 2 or 3 other people. She said that that Roscoe wanted out, whatever out meant. He wanted out of this business, and he basically told her, "I just signed my own death warrant." So he went from an asset to a liability, and they had to cover, they had to get rid of that liability. And so I believe that Roscoe was murdered because they were afraid he was going to tell.
He had had a conversion experience. He had turned his life around from all the stuff he had been doing, from the standpoint of being a big Jack Ruby pal at one time and making all those clubs, and he had cheated on his wife, and all of these things. But this pastor had an impact on him, and he was amazed one time they were having a building fund drive, and Roscoe was going to give $10,000 to it. Now, where does a lowly employee like Roscoe White, get $10,000? Good question. Anyway, that's kind of the scenario in which he died, and that's a long story too, but it's in the book.
I just wanted to point out, look at the date, was February of 1963. Whoever sent this, whoever was involved in this plot to kill Kennedy, they knew in February 1963 that he was going to be going to Austin, Houston, or Dallas, and they were going to eliminate him. Back in February, they knew that. At least that's what I read off of this document here.
Makes sense. Makes perfect sense. How could you write this document if you didn't know?
Yeah. Go ahead, Gary. There's the second one.
Okay, the second document has the same heading and so forth, and it says Dallas destination chosen. Your place hidden within the department. Contacts are within this letter. Continue on as planned. And the bottom portion is the same as the other. A former CIA, in fact, he was chief of station over in Angola at one time, said he had received messages like this. This was not unusual. I had a second CIA man come and look at this, and the first thing he noticed was it says contacts are within this letter. He said, that's important. Contacts are within this letter. What does that mean? Does that mean that there's some kind of coded message within that letter? Or was there another message that was attached to this letter? Or could it be microdots? Oswald was working, in fact, in his little book spoke of microdots. And he was working at one time for a company that dealt in that kind of thing. So that's the second message. Go ahead to the third one now.
Okay.
By the way, that's in September of '63.
Yeah.
That's when he goes and to work for the Dallas Police Department, and goes in as an apprentice, I guess you'd call him. He's learning.
This is the third one. Go ahead, Gary.
Okay. Basically, the headings are all the same except remarks Mandarin. It's code C instead of code A. But it says, stay within the apartment. Witnesses have eyes, ears, and mouths. You know what to do of the mix-up. The men will be in to cover all misleading evidence soon. Stay as planned. Wait for further orders. You can read into that a lot of things, but one of the things that pops out at you is that there's been a mix-up, and I think that was the killing of Tippett, but maybe other things also that apply here. But the men are going to come in to take care of any of the evidence that points to anything but a lone assassin. They did try to do that. They just failed at it, and failed miserably, in my opinion. Anyway, he was to stay within the department. And one of the things that also in the canister was this little book right here. It's a shorthand book, teaching book. It dates back probably into the early 1900s, 1920, 1930, somewhere along in there. And it's only partially there. But Roscoe had taken this old shorthand book and turned it upside down and started from the back cover instead of the front cover, and pasted pictures and made notations all the way through it. And one of the main things that it points out, not only is his signature in there and his military serial number is in there, but in the back cover, which is here, it says 28 people died from witness program. Out the rest of the people later. And then underneath that is his full signature, Roscoe Anthony White. The material in this thing is fascinating. We know it's from Roscoe and put together by Roscoe. And one of the first pages in it is this headline, "The Moment the World Stood Still." And it's got written in pencil on 11/22/1963. So we know it's about the assassination. And it has DI or DL. I think it's probably DL and NO. That would mean Dallas and New Orleans. February 14, 24, 63. These are numbers that are all the way through the entire book. It perhaps is some kind of code that's way above our pay grade. So we printed every page in the book so that people who might have some knowledge of codes might be able to tell something about that. Go ahead. This is the next picture is on this page, and it's, of course, is Jack and Robert Kennedy. And down at the bottom, he scribbled in, "Now got the head, going tail later." Mm-hmm. At that time, the saying of Carlos Marcello was that if you cut off the tail, the head will still bite you, you know. So they went for the head, and then that takes care of the tail. And so that was significant, we thought. Here's one that really kind of blows you away, and we're still working on this. The two guys at the bottom are Warren Commission staff, and below that it says "Cover Up Starts Now." But the top picture is what I thought of as a masculine-looking lady, and I thought I had found her, and I wrote in the book about who I thought it was. There was a female impersonator that looks just like that, and she was in and out of, or he was in and out of New Orleans at the club My Oh My, and his stage names, he was introduced as the fabulous Mr. Harvey Lee. Now you can't make this kind of stuff up, but that's the truth. But not long after the book was published, I found out that was not Mr. Harvey Lee. It was Doris Duke, Most people these days don't know who Doris Duke is, but you can see the second photograph from the left is where that photograph came from. That's a 1941 press photograph of Miss Doris Duke. She was called the richest girl in the world. Her dad owned the R.J. Reynolds Tobacco Company and other things. Reynolds Aluminum he was involved in. But why would Roscoe White put a picture like this in there? And I began to investigate her and find out that she was married to Porfirio Rubirosa, who was a Dominican man who at one time was a son-in-law of Rafael Trujillo down in the Dominican Republic, and that they were married for about a year. Then he died in a one-car, allegedly, accident, died on the way to the hospital in the ambulance in 1965. So is he one of the strange deaths? He was also an alleged assassin, and one of his associates he was meeting with in June of 1963 was Sam Giancana. They were meeting in Rome or Paris. I don't remember now off the top of my head, but
we probably should say, Gary, for those that aren't overly familiar with the Kennedy assassination case, Marcello is the crime boss in New Orleans, Sam Giancana in Chicago, and at one time an employee of his, if you will, was Jack Rubenstein, who drops the N Stein when he gets to Dallas.
That's right. We could go on and on with this book. There's things in it we don't know, but we print each page. You know, here's one where Ruby is shooting Oswald. Roscoe writes, "Set up job. Ruby was brave." That doesn't sound like somebody that doesn't know Ruby, does it?
No. This is incredible, Gary and Brian. This is amazing material that you have here. Overwhelming, really.
Well, he confesses basically, not only in the diary that disappeared, but here's a photograph, and he scribbles on this page, 7.65 Mauser, our gun used to kill President Kennedy, November 22nd, 1963. That's a confession. And he does it again in this book where he says, you know, we did it. Here's probably as important a little picture as you'll find in this. Here he says Mandarin kills K. Of course, we know from the diary that Mandarin was his code name, and from the cables. Kills K, uses 7.65 Mauser in assassination. But this is a newspaper print of the famous Mary Mormon photograph, if we could, and we can't. But up in the upper left-hand corner there, he puts a dot and an X. This is where he was standing, he's saying, when he fired at the president. That fits in with Ed Hoffman's story and the Bowers story.
Lee Bowers being the man in the building, the switchyard,
right
in the back of the parking lot here, with full view of this from behind. Yeah.
And it's obviously goes along with the head movement of the president when he's hit in the head, who went backwards and to his left, which is proper from a bullet being fired from that position.
Bill, we also have corroboration from an unusual source, but I'm glad we have it. If Roscoe's telling us he's positioned behind the fence the morning of the assassination, Geneva tells us that Roscoe left the house wearing civilian clothes, but carried his uniform on a hanger and put it in his car and drove away. Well, moments after the assassination, Bobby Hargis, one of the outriders of the Dallas police motorcycle officer who was riding to the left side of the president's car and was covered with all the blood and brain matter and all the spray from that shot that hit him in the head, stopped his motorcycle, let the motorcade proceed on. He parked his bike on the south side of Elm, ran across Elm, up the steps, and said he encountered Roscoe White. And he said Roscoe told him that he was looking for the shooter just as everybody else was. And so apparently that satisfied Bobby Hargis. Bobby Hargis returned to his motorcycle, and in the Botham photograph that was taken as the motorcade still comes, the rest of the motorcade passes through Elm Street. You see Hargis getting back on his bike and driving off. So we have Bobby Hargis saying without any mistake that he encountered Roscoe White on the grassy knoll. Beverly Oliver said that she saw Roscoe White without a hat and a gun belt walking down along the side near the steps, walking down from behind the picket fence. So we have two people that said Roscoe White was behind the fence. Now we have Roscoe himself saying he was behind the fence. So I don't know how you could have any more cooperation from three independent people than that. But that's an important part, that Roscoe places himself behind the picket fence. Bobby Hargis sees him, and Beverly Oliver sees him.
Brian, if I may ask, I know Beverly, how long ago did Beverly say this? Do you know, just for my own personal curiosity?
She told that to Gary.
Yeah, right when the story came out.
When
Now,
you
she didn't identify him as Roscoe. She identified him as Geneva's husband. She didn't know his name, but Geneva, Beverly worked next door at the Colony Club, and these girls, went back and forth
yeah.
with each
I was
other.
going to say, when you were talking about that earlier, that she may have known Beverly Oliver because Beverly Oliver, on break from the Colony Club, would sometimes go over to Jack Ruby's Carousel Club, where she says, among other things, that she had met Jack Ruby, she had met Lee Oswald, my friend Lee, to quote Beverly. So, boy, this is overwhelming, fellas. And how long's the book been out?
Since March.
I guess. Not January, didn't it?
Yeah.
Came out in
First 3 months. Yeah.
spring. Yeah.
Is it getting traction? Is your story getting traction? Are people seeing this? They're going to see this.
Well, we didn't have a major publisher, so there's no PR work being done. The only PR work is with guys like yourself.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then,
Did you try a major publisher? I mean, Gary, you've published before. How many books are you affiliated with now?
Well, the first book that I did was back in 1976, and about 12 publishers turned it down, and I printed it myself. And so that came out in 76. I was very successful in not selling it, and it's become a collector's item now.
Yeah.
And
what do publishers say to you? Do you think they're under some threat?
Well, back in 76, they weren't doing a whole lot of this. And in fact, the Zapruder Film had just been shown the year before I published on national television. They had really kept the lid on this. Yeah. So I thought it'd be a good time, but it wasn't. They were still not too interested. And it was I didn't pull any punches in the book. I titled it "The Government Cover Up: The Governmental Conspiracy to Conceal the Facts About the Public Execution of John Kennedy." That's a long subtitle, but it's the truth. It was a public execution, and every president that's succeeded to that office succeeded in going to that office. I have heard those shots.
Bill, you talked about publishers. We knew going in that no major publication firm is going to pick up this story because they don't want, it's too controversial, and there's not enough verification for these big publishing houses to go out on. And so I told Gary, I said, the next book we write, we can make $1 million guaranteed. All we have to do is say the Warren Commission was correct. We'll have people clamoring to publish it, like the Paul Landis story and Case Closed. I mean, Posner got a $3 or $4 million advance from Random House to publish that book, and was regurgitation of the Warren Commission the same way Bugliosi did. So no, we didn't have any desire to go to a big publishing house because we knew what the results would be. Why be disappointed when you know you can publish it yourself?
Let me go ahead and say this, Bill. The publisher is Michael and his wife, Rose Jeremy's son.
Yeah, Mercedes.
He, he published his own story about his mother, and so I became friends with him way back in the early '80s, I guess, and worked with him on his discovering the information about his mother and her strange death. He became a close friend, and so when we got ready to do this book, I said, "Well, Michael, will you do it?" And he jumped at the opportunity. So they're a small publisher, and I'm glad we used them.
Yeah, me too.
And where can people get it? Amazon?
It's available on Amazon, and it's also available directly through Pinnell Publishing Unlimited.
Thank you. Anything else you can think of?
Well, we don't know who was behind the assassination. You can guess and you can put all the information together, but the main thing is that this government is hidden that are making the decisions to do this. It's not the people we've elected and sent up there. We can send the best old honest guy up there, and they'll have him converted to their way of doing things within weeks. Unfortunately, the hidden government who pulls all the strings are the descendants of the people who took John Kennedy out.
I use the terminology hidden forces rather than government because I had students, I taught for 48 years in the public school system and some for universities, even as recently as this past fall. And people say, oh, the government did it. You can't say that. And it's way too broad. There are elements, however, that may be officially part of government, but probably aren't. But that's probably where you'll find this.
Yeah. Well, and we wanted to make sure that we didn't come off accusing the FBI of doing bad things. They do a great job, and I applaud them from a law enforcement perspective. But there's some folks in every walk of life that do things that they shouldn't be doing, and in this case, a couple of the folks involved in this, the Roscoe White story for the federal government, didn't do the right thing, and so we're having to catch up to them basically.
We're very careful. I mean, we pointed out in the book, we're not accusing the CIA or the FBI blanket of having done this, but we call the liars liars, and the people who have lied about this case, we don't pull any punches with that. They're bad players.
Ricky just wanted the story out there because he felt pretty frustrated that nobody believed him except Gary and the guys over at the Assassination Information Center. So he was thrilled to put his name on this because it is his story about his father and the trouble he went through. And so he was thankful that we did it this way rather than try to twist it all around and make it look like his dad was a bad guy. His dad wasn't a bad guy. He just did some things he did regret. He told Ricky, he said, there's some things you do in life that you regret. And he felt bad about it. And that's why he changed his life, became a Christian and said, hey, I want out of this. I don't want to do this anymore.
Yeah. Incredible story, fellas. Absolutely incredible. Blockbuster stuff, documented blockbuster stuff. One thing before we leave, I wanted to ask, you said Freedom of Information Act. Was it you two individually that filed under FOIA?
Gary did that.
Did you go to the National Archives?
I'd been doing FOIA. In fact, prior to this time, I had filed, maybe after this time, not prior to this time, I guess. I had filed with Bud Fensterwald in Washington about 30 or 40 lawsuits against the FBI, the CIA, all of these people that were withholding information. So I was used to doing this, and so it was easy for us to go after this, and they had to turn loose of it. The first pages we got were highly redacted. We got a lot of black pages, not blank pages, black pages. That's where they take a black marker and mark a lot of things out. But yeah, we got this, and it certainly pointed a strong finger of accessory against certain people in the FBI.
I did succeed in getting information from the Texas Department of Motor Vehicles there's a photograph that Ricky allowed us to print in the book, a picture of his father's car, a 1962 white Ford Galaxy four-door with the license plate clearly visible, just to verify that that was Roscoe's car. Ricky said Roscoe and his mom both had their own cars, and Roscoe had the Ford Galaxy. And so I sent a request to the Department of Motor Vehicles for that specific number. I had Ricky sign off on it, showing that he was the heir of the family. And they wrote back and said, that record is not available to the general public. Well, it's public information. License plates are public information. And so I immediately called the customer service manager and asked, why was my request denied? And she said, well, it's not we denied it. It's just that we can't find it. And apparently back in the 60s, the city of Dallas, before the age of computers, put registrations and names of owners of vehicles on 3x5 cards. And apparently that one card in that mess of cards was lost, that Roscoe's vehicle registration was lost. So typical bureaucratic, can't find anything, or it's blacked out. That's, we were expecting that too. So
Overwhelming information. Thank you both. Incredible.
Thank you.
Incredible story. Brian, thank you. And Gary, good luck with the book. Boy, I would imagine you would say when we're done, we've just scratched the surface here.
Yeah.
We have, and hopefully this will open some doors to other information and maybe some people, and some people have already come forward with information about this. So I think there'll be more as the book hits the market, and maybe with people like you being our PR people.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for that.
That'll open some doors, and we really do appreciate you having us on.
We'll see what happens. Very much appreciated. Thank you guys both.
Hey, thanks,
Best
Bill.
people.